So I can't see the folks online, but thank you, Janet. I was hoping this to be more of a discussion. That's the idea. We got some time over here. Usually I don't get to do this to such an extent. Usually it's rushed, but I just want folks to understand, what this modeling is all about, how it can help us in terms of managing our loads with the advisees. So I don't know how many people know about the early warning system. Okay. Ross, of course, knows because Ross from my office, Ross Diallo, is here with us. So in case you have any technical questions with the data and piece of it, Ross is going to help me out with that. So what we wanted to cover today is we've had this early warning system for right now this will be the 5th year. We started this in 2015 with the idea that, we are obviously enrolling students over the past few years, as you know, that we've been enrolling over 3,000 students. So what do we do, or how do we retain so many of these students? Right now, our goal, according to the last strategic plan, was to be around 90%. I'll show you in my next slide what the rates are. But the idea behind this early warning system is essentially we're looking at a whole host of data points to inform which students are likely to retain here at the university past 1 year. So you're enrolling this fall, and next fall, how many of these students are going to retain? So again, as I was saying, what's the benefit of it? Is it can help advisors. Right now, it is only restricted to the advisors, the attrition probability that you probably see in AVT. I'm going to talk about that as I go along. The instructors right now don't have access to this, but this is something that we can discuss, whether that's going to be beneficial for the instructors to also have this. The idea, again, is, as I said, is to identify very early on if there are any performance issues that can, down the road, lead to students not retaining at the university. And again, once we know who of these students are, who might be at risk of leaving the university, the idea is that if we can provide effective interventions and resources, that this will help with the attrition rate. So this is the slide that you're looking at right now. This is the undergraduate first-time full-time cohort, entering cohorts, and this is the retention rate starting from 2012. So those were the prior years. As you see, typically on average, we used to hover around 85% or so. But starting in 2015, when we implemented the system, we also had a process change in terms of how we were recruiting students, what financial aids we were giving to them. So many of those things changed starting in 2015. So as I mentioned before, that the rate that we were targeting for under the previous strategic plan was around 90%. As you see, for the 2015 entering cohort, we were at 89.1. We went up to 89.4. Then for the 17 class, we are at 88.9. And for the 2018 cohort, this is preliminary. We don't have the week 6 census yet. But as of the current data as it stands, we are hovering around 88.6. So yes, we have managed to improve our retention rate by 4 or 5 percentage points, whichever way you want to say it. But as you can see, past the 16 cohort, we are on a slightly declining trend. It's not bad, if you look at all the data that we have studied at OPIR, we think that, as an institution, Drexel is sort of overperforming on this metric. But nonetheless, given that our goal was to get to 90%, we still haven't managed to achieve that goal yet. Any questions on these metrics? So what does this early warning system do? We look at a lot of indicators, right? We're trying to figure out about students, the characteristics that they bring in when they're enrolling over here. Can we use those characteristics or those indicators to figure out who might be at risk? Can a model predict that? So as I've labeled that, what he's saying in pre-enrollment that the students bring with them is, okay, their high school GPA, their SATs, gender, what entering college or school, whether you're a Liberty Scholar or not, first generation, you are in the 4 or 5 year program, underrepresented minority status, which region you're from. We also look at whether you're an athlete or not, whether you're Pell eligible, did you file the FAFSA, what is your demonstrated financial need, how much institutional aid are you getting from the university to enroll. As I mentioned from 2015 that we've changed the way we award aid. Previously, it was more merit heavy. Now we are merit, and we also try to meet your needs. So we do award money based on your financial need. So before going on to the next set of indicators, so what I want to say, there are some, when you look at these indicators that I've mentioned over here, some are pretty obvious in terms of saying okay, if your high school GPA is high, then that most likely that you should be here. If your SAT is high, then yes, you will be here. Depending, the gender might be tricky, so we'll figure that out. College and school might be tricky. I mean, engineering students probably have a higher SAT compared to some other college or school, so maybe engineering students are likely to stay here compared to the other ones. Legacy, this is usually a positive indicator that, if you're a student with legacy, if any of your parents or brother sisters have gone to Drexel, there's a high likelihood that you're going to be here. First generation, this is something that is becoming important, because previously we were only able to identify first generation from when you filed the FAFSA, but now because of the common application, we are able to get more information. So it will seem like our first generation population is increasing every year. So we want to take a look at it. That is, if you're a first generation student, does it mean that you're going to retain or not retain? There is definitely a difference in whether you're in a 4-year and a 5-year program. And you'll see that when I'll get into the model a bit later. People might think that if you're an underrepresented minority, then you might be at risk here at Drexel. This could be at many other institutions. This is nothing specific to Drexel. Typically, that's how it turns out. The region, as I'm pretty sure most of you know, that we are a pretty regional school, even though we are national. But depending on where you're drawing your student population from, there's a likelihood that the further you are away, there's a chance that you might not retain or you might be homesick. Whole host of reasons that you might want to leave the university. Pell eligibility is another thing that, again, Pell eligibility indicates that you probably have a very high demonstrated need. So we all know that if you have a high demonstrated need and if we're not giving you enough financial aid, then there's a risk that you're always worried about the financial piece of it. And so you might not perform well. And the other two I mentioned that goes with it is the financial need and institutional aid. So typically, the relationship is the more need you have, then there's less likelihood that you're going to be here at Drexel. But if you get more aid, there should be a positive relationship in terms of your chances of being here. So these are the pre-enrollment characteristics that we look at. Then what we are calling the engagement factors. This is okay. All right. So the engagement factors this is what we think, once you are here, that this becomes more important in predicting whether you're going to be here at Drexel or not. So what we are calling engagement factors right now. This is mostly, as you can see from the list, is all your learn management system data. So the number of courses that you're taking. Then weekly, we take a look at what's your deviation from the average of your access. If the course is in Blackboard, whether you're accessing the course or not. In how many minutes are you spending in that course on Blackboard? How are you interacting? The deviations, from the average, all the students who are accessing it, then we're measuring against that average what your deviation is. Whether your deviation on your submissions in the course, and then, the weekly GPA, depending on your quizzes, your whatever that might be, a test, a midterm, whatever that is. The other one that we've looked into it is your gym swipe data. So like in your first term, weekly, the number of swipes you have at the gym, not necessarily saying like you're going there to exercise, but for whatever reason, that's a social interaction that you're going there. You might be meeting with your friends, or you really have time management skills, so you figured out your schedule, that you have time to go to the gym. So that's something that we also wanted to factor into our modeling piece. Yes?
I've always found that interesting, and I was wondering if there's any discussion about other locations on campus where they would do that?
Absolutely.
Like a library?
Correct.
Or
yes. So again, it's a question of getting access to those data. So the library one, we looked at it, but again, for security reasons, we couldn't get access to that information. So for example, let's say it turns out that the number of times you go to the library comes out to be a positive indicator that you're going to retain over here. So we have to use that to predict on an ongoing basis, but we didn't have access to that information for security reasons. So the only one we could get our hands on is the gym data. So that's why we could use that. But yes, we are looking for information like that, other residence halls where students are staying. We've got to look at all the more information that we have. We want to take that into consideration to see if that predicts your likelihood of retention. So at this point, it's a security issue. That's why we couldn't use that information.
I'm sorry, why is it a security issue in one place versus another?
Correct. Russ, do you want to get into that a little bit?
Not to derail the conversation.
Sure. I mean, I think the answer is really just that public safety is responsible for the library, and the gym is maybe self-maintained or maintained through IT. We have a better relationship with IT, but public safety says it's a security concern.
Got it.
So I think it's probably that simple. I mean, there are other data sources we've talked about. For instance, some schools are tracking Wi-Fi, like if you're sitting here and your phone is charged, then it's connecting to the network, and maybe that could be a nice proxy for attendance in a course. And that's potentially useful since we don't have attendance. You can see nothing on there really mimics attendance, and so that would potentially be really valuable for the model. But there's various issues with that, especially security issues around that. And I think we as an institution can figure out whether or not that's something we're comfortable with, whether or not we have the technical infrastructure.
How about meal swipes?
We have looked at that. It didn't come in. We tried an analysis to see if there was a paper that was kind of making the rounds, which said it had a methodology developed to figure out whether or not you had friends, quote unquote, that you ate with. And so basically, if someone swiped in within a minute or something like that, when you swiped in, then that's a friend for you or whatever. And if you had repeated interactions with that person, then we assume that actively actually is a friend and not someone who just showed up in line after you. So I did a little digging on that. It didn't really seem to pop, and so we haven't had a chance to dig more on that.
Okay. Other questions, Rebecca? Or
No,
good?
thank you.
All right. So far, I've highlighted for you what the pre-enrollment characteristics a student brings, and then how you're performing here in your LMS and swipes. And then the last piece of data that we take into consideration for building this is the freshman self-assessment survey data. I'm sure you're aware of it when students are the ones who have enrolled or indicated that they have enrolled or made a deposit. We go out with a survey and we ask a whole bunch of questions. This is just some example of it. Obviously, the survey is quite big, but I'm highlighting the ones that that we tried in our modeling process. So what's your likelihood of completing the program on time? You're rating yourself on this, that, yeah, I think I'm going to complete the program on time. Are you going to seek out a Drexel advisor or a mentor for support? How many hours are you going to participate working? Again, this is not on co-op, but you think that you have a financial need and the institution hasn't given you enough money, so there's a sense that, I got to finance my education or my well-being, so I'm going to work, but not on co-op. Um, Self-rating on effective written communications, time management, how you rate yourself on math skills. So there's a whole bunch of it. I'm just highlighting a few that, that's part of the survey. So if you just go take a look at the instrument on the survey instrument, you'll see a whole bunch of information there. That's what we take into consideration. So as you can see, there's numerous data points, right? So how do we make sense of all this? Like, how do we take all this into consideration to say, like, okay, tell me based on these metrics, which student should I focus on? So what we do is we put them through an algorithm where we try to predict your retention likelihood. I'm sorry, a withdrawal. So we say, like, okay, are you going to withdraw? And then we look at all those indicators that I mentioned, throw them in, and see what predicts. So on your left-hand side, what you're looking at saying increase in likelihood. That means if you have these characteristics, and again, this is sample, okay? I'm just trying to give a flavor of what these might be. Again, these changes from year to year, depending on, again, the whole idea is that, we are using past behavior to predict the future. So what happened in 16 some of it might not be relevant in 17. So we take into consideration the immediate past year to predict what's going to happen for the future. Because let's say in 2016, we had about, 2,300 students. But then in 2017, we had more than 3,000 students. So we think that the 2,300 students might not be relevant for this one. So for 18, then we use the 17 data. So it's always the immediate one because we think that's the most relevant in terms of predicting what's going to happen. So what you're looking at on your left-hand side is essentially saying that, okay, if you're from the West region, there's a chance that you will not be here. If your demonstrated need is high, as I mentioned before, makes sense that it increases your likelihood that you're going to withdraw. Now, this might be confounding, that effective written communication. It again is the perception of the institution. Drexel might be perceived as a very technical school. So if I'm good at writing, this might not be the place for me. I might be better off in a liberal arts institution. So whatever that might be, and again, understand that all these variables that I took into consideration is interacting with each other, okay? So by interacting, it's trying to figure out, and it says, like, okay, these are my most significant predictors. When I say significant, that means, you're putting it through a statistical algorithm, so it's statistically saying that this comes out to be significant in terms of predicting that you're going to withdraw. As I mentioned, hours participating, work for pay, not on co-op. So yeah, if I have to work to make ends meet, that increases my chance of withdrawing because I'm not paying attention to where I need to, why I came to school in the first place, Here's something that we threw in like 2 years ago. We decided to ask the student that what are your chances that you are going to actually transfer to another institution before the year ends? And if the students does indicate that there is a high likelihood that they will transfer to another college, it came out significant that they really do end up transferring to another institution. I was talking about the programs, the 4-year versus the 5-year. It turns out that students who indicate that they want to be in the 5-year program, they are less likely to withdraw from the institution because those are the students who probably know Drexel well. They understand the co-op program. And again, some programs don't have the choice of a 5-year versus a 4-year. So taking all that into consideration, what the model is basically saying is that if you're in a 5-year program, there is less likelihood that you're going to withdraw. If you're interacting in a course, if you're submitting your assignments on time, all these are like, if you're swiping at the gym, the more frequency with which you swipe, that's a good indicator that you're going to be here at the institution. As I mentioned before, this is not a surprise that high school GPA, the higher your GPA is coming in, there's a likelihood that you're going to not leave the institution. The LMS GPA, so like, once you're in the course, your GPA within that course, and again, we are aggregating over all the courses. This is not just one course. So based on those aggregations, the cumulative one, we Yes, your GPA is high, academically you're doing well, so there's less likelihood that you're going to leave the institution. But again, not to say that, higher aptitude students, even if they're performing well, there are some of them that actually leave. So, but majority of them who are achieving, higher GPA, they're going to stay over here. Some of those high achieving students might leave the institution for a different reason. It might not be the best fit. Here at Drexel, Drexel was probably their second choice institution. Now they've gotten into their first choice institution. There are a whole host of factors that can go into it, but it's a very small proportion. Nonetheless, some of them do leave. Legacy, as I mentioned, is not a surprise. So when I was talking about the college or school that we control for, so when we put those in for this year, it came out that if you're in COMAD or in the business school, liberal business, then you're less likely to withdraw from the institution. Aid, institutional aid, again, the more aid you get, yes, you have less, there's a chance that you are high aptitude. That's why you got so much aid in the first place, or your need was high. So need and merit combined together, you've got a higher institutional aid package. If that's the case, then yes, you're less likely to leave the institution. If you mention that, yes, you're very confident that I'm going to finish my program on time, or if I'm going to pursue an accelerated joint degree, because, just getting one degree is quite tough. You said like you want to pursue a joint degree, then you are less likely to leave the institution. Does this make sense? Yes.
How stable are some of these? I'm thinking specifically about that region west.
Yes.
If we are assuming that a student from far away is homesick,
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine that in November, when the weather's changing,
Mm-hmm.
and the days are getting shorter, and if we haven't gotten a friend group, maybe if that's a stable variable, we can just, put out a communication to students about connecting to organizations.
Right.
Is that something that's stable enough that we could create something?
Yes. So typically, as I was mentioning, that if you are not from the region over here, because our biggest draw is literally Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. That's Ross, if I'm not mistaken, that's more than 50% of our. Correct. So that's where our biggest draw is. So anything that's outside this region, it doesn't just have to be the West. You can have a communication that's geared towards those students who are just outside of the region. Yes, correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we've typically seen that happens quite a bit. That's pretty stable in terms of how it makes it. Any other question?
One more question.
Yes.
Chance that you're transferred to another institution, it's a 4-point scale.
Mm-hmm.
No chance, some chance.
High, yes, very good chance. Right.
Right?
Yes.
What's that playing off of? Is it like any possibility that the student has indicated that they're going to transfer countries?
No, so it goes, so the rating that it is talking about,
Yeah.
I think if it's coded 1, 2, 3, 4, so if you're rating it high, 4 means, there's a high chance that you're gonna, so that's what it's making it.
Okay.
So the way it works is like, let's say, 60 people, for example, it's mentioned that there's a very high chance that I'm going to leave the institution. So then come next year, let's say 40 of them have really left. So the model picks up on that and says like, oh, that's a very high number who said there's a chance, and actually I was left. So that's what's going to pick that up. Question, yes.
It's interesting to me that the 5-year co-op is up there, but then also COMAD, because isn't COMAD mostly 4-year?
Correct.
But still, those 4-year students, like they're most.
So there are other 4-year students, besides COMAD. So maybe COMAD had a very high retention rate for that particular year. So there are programs probably like students who are enrolling in. That's like, oh, this is a great program. It doesn't matter if it's 4-year. I like the program, so I'm going to stick around. But there might be other colleges where there are 4-year programs. So let's say, for example, it could be in business, it could be in education, wherever. And those students might not be retaining at the same rate. So that's why the 5-year comes out as it's high enough that it comes out as a significant rate. Yes.
the earlier slides that show the first to second year persistence,
The retention rate?
retention
Yes.
rate, are there any of these factors that are showing up more frequently in those who are leaving? Does that make sense?
Say that again?
So the students that are leaving us and not persisting into their sophomore year,
Yes.
when you go back and you look at the predictive items here, right? Any of these variables, right? So the ones that are leaving,
Mhm.
are we able to point to any of these variables?
Yeah, that's all. That's the makeup of it.
Okay,
In-
and I guess what I'm saying is there one that's more prominent than the others?
So if you want to isolate which of these metrics is playing a bigger role compared to
Yes,
some of
that's
them,
what I'm trying to say.
it's going to be your academics. It's mostly your GPA.
Yeah.
That's going to be the biggest one that's going to drive. And your LMS interactions, those are the things that are driving whether you're going to stay here or not.
So
What we have found is that after whatever your first term, end of your first term GPA is, that's your biggest predictor whether you're going to stay here at Drexel or not. Besides the fit and all that stuff, your first term GPA is a huge predictor whether you're going to retain at the end of year or not. So essentially, as you can see that what we say in our statistical grammar, I'm controlling for all these pieces, right? I'm controlling for all these variations. You're in a 5-year program, you're a male or a female, like you are in this college. I'm controlling for your institutional package that you receive, what your demonstrated need is, and your high school GPA, and then your LMS GPA and everything. After controlling for all this stuff, the biggest chunk that predicts whether you're going to stay here or not is your first time GPA.
I think that's really profound for this group to know.
Yes. The financial, yes, you're going to worry about it. As an institution, what do you want to do about it? That's a different question. That's EMS's question. We have had conversations with Vince and everybody else where we talk about, Pell students, one of the biggest worry is that, yes, we have increased our aid packages for those students, but one thing we have to evaluate is that enough in terms of how much we have provided in terms of aid. If there are significant gaps, still, it's a lot of money for these students to come up with. So once I'm controlling for all that stuff, money, yes, that's important, but at the end of the day, it is your academics that is predicting whether you're going to stay here.
One thing I would add to that is we've seen in the first year that there's about maybe half of the people who leave, we could term that academic attrition, in that they have a GPA less than 2.5. And then the other half, we'll call it non-academic, in the sense that they have a GPA greater than 2.5. And so those are people who, they just don't feel like they fit at the institution. And maybe that's financial, maybe that's social, maybe that's something else. But, and Shujo is absolutely right in terms of that first year GPA and how powerful that is. But when it comes to something social, for instance, like am I fitting in socially, have I made friends, that sort of thing, that could be a really powerful predictor. We don't have any data on that.
Right.
We don't have good data on that. And so the degree to which we can predict academic attrition is higher, I'll say, than the degree to which we can predict this kind of looser fit type attrition, even though they're about equally important.
So what I wanted to highlight in this one, as I was mentioning that, so yeah, you come in with this pre-enrollment characteristics. What are you going to do about it? My GPA is my GPA, my SAT is my SAT. I can't change any of that. So what I wanted to show in this one is that gray section that you're looking at is essentially the engagement data, where I was talking about the LMS and your swipes and everything. So as you see that we actually produce these predictive models on a weekly basis. So we're looking at information. Week 2, we produce a model. It might have the same variables that you saw. It might not. Like some might make it in, some might not make it in. So week 3, we again have another model that predicts. But what is consistently going up, as you can see in that gray area, is the engagement data. That becomes super important as the week progresses, and all this other, the pre-enrollment stuff, the FSA data starts to decline. Now, it doesn't go away completely. It's still predicting. And again, understanding that this is the one that I'm talking about here is just the fall term. Then we again build these similar models for winter and then for spring. So what you're looking at is like fall data. But what I wanted to highlight is that how the engagement data becomes so important. So you might come in with some characteristics. Yes, we can't do anything about it. But how you perform over here is so important. So anything that we can do to provide resources to the students who are struggling or who might be at risk, if we can change the course for those students, then yes, that's where we're going to affect change in terms of moving that retention number. All right, so now we come to the actual thing that matters, right? So this is what the advisors will see. So probability of withdrawal, you'll see this in AVT. I'm going to go through some screenshots of AVT after this, but I just wanted you to understand when you're looking at these AP numbers, what it actually means. And again, understand that we are predicting a likelihood of withdrawal. This is not certainty, okay? These are statistical models. It has its errors, obviously, because so what we're trying to do is we're taking all this information, trying to boil it down to this one number that you can pay attention to decide whether it's worth having a conversation with this student and figuring out if we can steer them to the right direction in terms of whatever they need in terms of resources, if that can help the student make it here at Drexel. So on your left, what you see as I'm saying like attrition probability of 2%, and as you can see, that student is in the green. So we have this metrics where 0 to 20 is red, 20 to 50 is yellow, and 50 and above is green. So this student has an attrition probability of 2%. That means this student is very less likely to withdraw because the student is in green. So, but that does not necessarily mean the student is not going to withdraw. There's a less chance that the student will withdraw given everything that we've looked at. But it might be that, what Ross was talking about, this, so it might not be a fit. Whatever reason that fit is, that, yeah, I'm not getting, I thought this was going to be much more tough or like rigorous than what I had anticipated. No, Drexel was my second choice institution. Whatever the reason might be. But this student definitely has a less likelihood of withdrawal. Now, if you look at the student at the right, this student is in red because the student has a 21% chance of withdrawal. Now, you might argue that it's only 20%. Why are you saying that's high? So if you look at it, the way it works is, if you recall our retention number, it's around 89, right? So there's an 11% chance, 11% way that you're going to, this number of students who are leaving. So that's why it might seem low. It's just the opposite of it because what I'm predicting, because only 11% has left, right? 89% have retained. So that's why the probability is just the reverse of it, where anything that's 20 and above, there's a high likelihood that we should be paying attention to that student. So definitely we should be paying attention to that, the one who's came out as 21%. Now, again, when you're making all these calls in terms of whether we should see this student or not, the idea over here is, yes, I'm going to talk about model accuracy and all that stuff. But if you think about it, we are trying to improve our retention, right? So we want to retain as much students as possible. I can guarantee you will never have 100% retention, okay? That's never going to happen. But when you're deciding whether you want to call this students or not, yes, we've looked at a whole bunch of factors to say, like, this student, if I compare the two students, the one that says 2% versus 21%, yes, this student has more high likelihood of withdrawal, but it might end up this student might not withdraw and that student might withdraw. It's completely possible, as I said, right? So this is not certainty. So you're making judgment calls based off it, but what we have done through this algorithm is to give you an idea of which student is more likely to leave. So you should be paying attention to these kinds of students. Now, it might so happen that some student might be really in red, okay? And they're consistently in red week after week. You might argue that maybe that student doesn't have a chance of making it here in Drexel. It's entirely possible, right? But then you as advisors will meet with the student, decide that. It might so happen that you might decide, okay, maybe you know what? Engineering is probably not for you. Maybe business might be a good fit for you. You can decide on the fit. And if that means that when you ask the student to change their school or their major, whatever that might be, if that can help the student retain over here, do it, fine. But if the student who's consistently in red, you know, like really in red, and not teetering at this border of yellow and red, so you might have a higher likelihood of saving that student who's teetering at the border, but the ones who are really in red, they might not be academically fit to make it here at Drexel. So at that point, I don't know what else to do. I mean, like, you know, you can advise them to transfer somewhere else, or if they change into a program that might help them be here, that's a conversation that you have to have with that student. Does that make sense, what I'm talking about? Questions on that? All right, so I can't zoom in over here, but that's fine. So this is the AVT tracking, which I'm sure everybody here is familiar with. So if you look at that, I can't zoom in on it, I'm sorry. If you look at your bottom left-hand corner, you'll see something called an AP, right? That's your attrition probability. So you see that student has a 24% chance that this student will leave the university. So when you click on that, it will bring to this next screen. So it will highlight that, you know, this is just an example that, you know, this was in 2017 spring. In week 10, this student still had a probability of 24% that will not make it here at Drexel at the end of the year. Then it lists for you some of the factors that might be responsible for why the student is performing the way the student is performing. So like, you know, it says something of, I mean, mostly the factors that we list there has to do with your LMS. As we said that, you know, the engagement data becomes more important as the weeks goes along. And at that point in spring, yes, definitely your engagement data is giving you the indication what it should. So yeah, so this student has less than average assignments submitted for the courses that he or she is enrolled in. And that could mean also that the person has a low GPA. So academically, this student is not performing well, and there's a chance that this student might leave. Then on the bottom, if you want to click on the trend for this student, how the student has been performing, if you click on that, you'll be able to see the attrition probability, you know, like week after week, how the student has been doing. As I said, this student for the entire term has been in red. So you can take a look at it, you know, like from week 1 to week 10, what the model was predicting. Now again, understand when I'm talking about all these things, the model has taken all those 3,000 students, looked at all these factors to say like, what's your chance of making it or not making it, right? On a student level, sometimes it might differ. You know, there are certain things, again, the prediction is as good as the data is. So let's say if you knew something about the student but was not captured in the system, it might say like, oh, this student has a high probability of leaving the institution. But no, I know the student has been doing well because, yeah, you don't see it in Blackboard, but I know he submitted his things on time. So, but we're relying on this system to get data to predict what's going to happen. If it's not in the system, then the model doesn't know. So it's assuming that, oh, this student is performing badly, so I'm going to predict that this student is going to leave. So there are those nuances we have to keep in mind. But for the most, on the aggregate level, as I'll show you that this model is working the way it's supposed to work. And again, as we talked about the social data, as we try to incorporate all those information, I'm sure the model is going to perform even better. But with the information that we have, as you can see, that's a lot of information. It's not that we're lacking information that we can't predict what's going to happen. So we do have a lot of information. And on a student level, it might differ, you know, from one student to the other. That doesn't mean it's wrong. We have to, if you find something of this sort that says like, oh, you know what, why is the model predicting this way, whereas I thought the student is doing well or whatever, please don't hesitate to shoot us an email, either to me or to Russ, so that we can look at it in depth to see, like, why did the model predict for this student, so that we can provide you an explanation. So again, I just want to highlight that this is not a black box, okay? So there's things that's going behind it, which I wanted to give you a picture of so that you understand what's informing, whenever the model predicts what's going to happen. Any questions so far? I was talking about model accuracy. Sometimes you might think that, oh, how do we know this model is working the way it's supposed to work? So let's concentrate on that actual retained for one moment, okay? So the 0 to 50, 51 to 60, and through 96 to 100, what you see on your x-axis is your retention likelihood, okay? So we plotted that to say, like, okay, your blue line is your actual retention, all right? Starting from 37% to 96%. And what the red line is, that is what this model is trying to predict. So as you can see, if this line was exactly perfect, you might suspect that we're making numbers up. So I promise you we're not making numbers up, okay? So with the information that I was talking about, with all the information that we have, we know about the student, we can predict with a great deal of accuracy of what's likely is going to happen, whether the student is going to make it here or not. So this is for assurance purposes that it is working, okay? If it doesn't work, or you have, again, a student that doesn't fall into this, that can happen because you have to understand that we're trying to predict at such an aggregate level that sometimes students can fall off here and there, but we want to know that if it's not working, then we want to know why is it not working, okay? Any questions? You guys don't ask questions. Yes.
So given the limitations of the overall statistic, of which many factors are going into that score, from the eyes of the advisor, it could be multiple things that are determining that red score. It could be things that can be influenced. It could be things that can't be influenced.
Absolutely.
It potentially sets up, an awkward conversation if you're trying to figure out which one of those they are.
Right.
The remedy, therefore, is, I understand that the statistics are predictive, but the remedy for any given student, given that those statistics might not apply to that student, it's tricky because you are engaging in a relationship with that student.
Right.
And going off of too many things that are statistically based and not based on the student can impact that relationship negatively.
Correct. I mean, that's where, that's probably where the art comes in terms of how you have that conversation with that student. But again, as I said, the prediction is going to be as good as the data that is relying on, right? So if the data is wrong for that student, yes, the model is going to predict something is wrong, right? But, so if you know about a student that, as you look at these numbers, right, for the most part, as you can see, it's predicting with great deal of accuracy of what will happen to that student, right? But you might know something about that student that the model cannot capture. That will always be the case. It doesn't matter what kind of a statistical model that you use, it will always happen. It doesn't matter if you combine 5 models or 6 models or whatever, that error will always be there.
I guess for point of clarification, if someone is from the West Coast and has financial issues and someone else, one of the other things
that you can control.
That you can control.
Correct.
But they are in.
But let's say there's nothing to do with
are they still going to be in the red?
Absolutely. If they're not performing well in terms of their LMS.
But if they are performing well,
then there's a likelihood that the model will not say that student might be at risk. Because as you saw, let me go back to this one. See, this is what I was talking about, where the LMS keeps on taking over what the predictions are. So specifically for that student, let's say the student is doing really well, right? So the student might, for example, be in yellow instead of being in red because the student is doing really well. So, but let's say the student's demonstrated need is so high that the model is latching onto it to say, but we have to see like what the weekly predictions are going to be, because if this is taking over all these other factors that you can control for, and if the student is really performing well in the gray, then there's a less chance that the model will say that the student is going to be in red.
They have to be doing really, really well.
Correct. Yes. Correct.
Kind of along the same lines, when you have a student in the red and you click in to see what the factors are and there's nothing listed, where do you go from there? That they can't see anything they can't see, it just says there's no factors listed.
Right. I mean, in all likelihood, and I'll let Ross speak for that because we kind of did. We wanted to get away from all those pre-enrollment stuff, because as she highlighted, that we can control for those things. So, like, if let's say some of those things are making it in to say, like, yeah, this is the reason why you are in red, we can't do anything about it. And then how do you have that conversation? So we are trying to restrict it to all those LMS factors. If you're not performing well there, then it will highlight for you. But I know there are situations where it doesn't
So those
highlight.
won't come up, right?
Those won't probably come
It
up.
doesn't say it.
Yeah.
Just because personally, when just looking a few students up and there was nothing listed,
Yeah.
but they were red.
Right, correct. So that in that situation, so let's say you're looking at a specific week, and the student is in red, right, and nothing showed up there. Depending on what week you're looking at, so let's say you looked at it in week 3, for example, and then the student was predicted to be in red, but no factor shows up. So maybe wait another week or two and see, like, oh, the student is really consistently in red. So the timing of those conversations might be important. Or if you really want to speak to that student and you don't have any information, just shoot us an email and we'll look into it and see if there's anything that, any flag that we can give to you so that you can talk about it. Any other questions?
I guess I would just add on that, basically, there's only so many things we can control, and I think the key is just hopefully to establish communication with the students that are at risk, and as the kind of the one figure showed, a lot of it's going to be determined out of Learn in the first fall, and then subsequently a lot of it will be influenced by that overall cumulative GPA, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But ultimately, there's only certain things that you can really help a student change, and some of those things aren't going to change. And if it is a student with a lot of financial need that's not getting that much aid, that's a student that's going to be very hard to help with the advisor's toolkit, right? But I think it's really just a matter of having that conversation and seeing what the student brings up. And also I would defer to the expertise of the people that have these conversations a lot in terms of what possibilities are.
I would be interested in exploring whether or not there is a series of questions that some of our advisors have already thought through for students that are in yellow/red based on the factors, and just open-ended questions. Tell me about what's happening with your online, your reading learning courses. So, a student who's got a low GPA in Blackboard learning courses, is that because they don't? Maybe do they not know how to use the tool? Is it the content? But just to create some heuristic where it would make it easier for the advisor who really wants to be engaged in exploring what's going on.
So, you're talking about developing some best practices in terms of, how do you navigate these kinds of situations?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Do you use the gym? When you're not in class, what are you doing?
Right.
Well, I go to the gym. Okay, well that makes sense. But you're swiping in. But maybe you'll learn that they're also involved. They're going through Rush or they don't call it Rush now, called something else. maybe that's holding up their talent, or they
Yes.
don't. But I think that could be an interesting project.
I think some of the advisor concern revolves around things, situations when, say they're in the red, but everything in LMS looks good, and they can't see anything else, any other, those pre-enrollment factors, and they don't want to cause panic in the
Absolutely.
student. So
Right.
they have to make that professional judgment as to whether or not to reach out or to say something. And I think a lot of the times they're going to just say, I don't want to call attention to something that's not an issue.
Right.
We don't need to.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely understandable, right? So, again, in those situations, if it happens, as I said, reach out to us if we can help you in that. Yes, obviously you don't have access to all of the information that's going in. We can talk about that and see what can be made available in ABT or whatever that can inform that decision. But in most situations, if something concerns you, before I reach out to the student, I want to know a little bit more, and if we can help in any way, we can work that out. And if there are more situations like that, then we got to figure out, how to provide you that information. It could be a tool like Tableau or whatever. If we want to develop another page in ABT that can help with this. The idea of all this, you're highlighting some of the things that we want to address because we really want people to use this tool. The idea is we have tons and tons of data. How do we make utilization of that data to affect change? That's the piece. So if there's any way we want to make things easier for the advisors to get information, yes, because you don't want to call in somebody and create a panic situation. We absolutely understand that. You shouldn't do that. But if you can have more information before you actually call in, we have to figure that out. How can we give you that information? It's we are not holding any information, all of this stuff. We want it to be as transparent as possible. And that's why I'm here talking about how this system works and everything so that you understand what's happening behind the scenes to say why did a student get a score of 21 or 25, whatever that is, right? So if there's information that you don't have that you would like to have, and so you can do your job effectively, then we should know that so that we can make sure that that's available to you. We can work with IT or whoever to get that resolved.
Piggybacking on that too, I think it may be, and this maybe just goes to the standard operating procedure kind of concept, but I think you maybe you perceive this differently, but I think there's probably never any harm in checking in with the student, and then if they are interested in having a conversation, to just touch on a couple of things that we know are always potentially public. How are your classes going? How are things socially? Are you making friends? However the proper way to talk about that is, and then lastly, we know financial is an issue. Are you worried about paying your bill? Whatever the best practices around that are. But I think if you touch upon those 3 points and no concerns are raised, I think that's probably the end of the discussion and probably the worse for wear.
Right, figuring out how to have that conversation. So in that example as Ross was talking about, let's say exactly that. Okay, academically you're doing fine, but let's say you have a very high, need, and maybe the model is grabbing onto that to say yeah, there's a chance that you might be teetering at that red. So again, we got to figure out how to have those conversations, and having just a general conversation might be better than saying oh, I called you in because I see you're in red, you're at risk of leaving the university. So again, you guys probably know how to have those conversations better than we will ever do because you're interacting with those students on a daily basis. So I will leave that to your experts. Yes.
I think having the conversation isn't necessarily the problem. It's whether to bring them in, and of course, on the face of it, yes, bringing a student in and having a conversation, no harm, no foul. But the reality is we are on a very tight term,
Yes.
and there's a whole lot of other things that absolutely have to be done by a
Correct.
certain point.
Yes.
So it is kind of, hey, I just wanted to call you in. It is a little, in practice, not as helpful when somebody's in red and
Correct.
we have no idea why.
Correct. So I completely understand that. So let's say you have 100 advisors, okay, for example.
That would be nice, but way more than that.
I'm just giving an example. You have 300 advisors. That's a good number, right? 300? Okay, much better. So you have a 300 advisees, and you're trying to manage all this. Who am I supposed to talk with? Who am I not supposed to talk with, right? And then when you bring down that list, and you know for sure 5% of those 300, let's say, or whatever that number is, even 30 kids, right? That you know, and you have reasons that the system is producing for you to say that they're not performing consistently well. It's all in the LMS. That's what. Have a conversation with those 30 students, right? Maybe there are 5 students who are at that. I think I can guarantee you that there's less of those students that you are mentioning. Those might be the exceptions versus the ones who really have an issue who might be in red. Let me know if that's the other way, because from what we have modeled and we looked at, if you're really in red, it's most likely academically you're not performing well, and that's the reason you're really in red.
So if that's the most major reason, and the university knows that, why wouldn't more resources go into college-specific tutoring? Because there's a big imbalance between that. If we already know that half of the reason people don't retain is GPA.
Correct. I don't have an answer to that, honestly. I wish I did. I don't have the answer to that. It's finances, budget.
Jenny, what if you kind of look at this differently? So right now, looking at COAX's data, I see 72 students in the red. Like at League 4, I see 72. If it is GPA based towards the end of the term, there's a good chance that you're going to see these 72 students at probation meetings, right? So you're seeing these students anyways. What if instead of thinking one more meeting, one more thing, one more addition, what if it's complementary to a meeting that you're already going to have, and you're taking this information and tool and laying it on top of the conversation you're having with the student already? I see that you're going to come in here, you're going to be at my probation meeting. I know these other factors, maybe what the student is perceiving the issue and what is predicted as the issue aren't necessarily the same thing. At 18, as a traditional student, maybe you don't know or are aware that these certain factors are actually an issue, and you're like, well, it was just that one course. It's chemistry. It's not, I don't know how to study for chemistry. I don't know how to study for things, but it's not just for memorization. And maybe that helps guide the student's conversation into not just what they're telling you in 30 minutes, but that larger global thing that can help guide them to something else. Like,
Yeah, I mean, we do that.
services that exist, but maybe this is also helpful in that way instead of, one more, because 5 weeks later, let's see what.
I mean, we do that. I was commenting on the comment about we want you to be using this data. for
Correct.
your
I mean, again, as you mentioned, this is a very short time frame, right? So if you're missing out, I mean, it's already one, right? So that's the whole point of it. It's like if sooner we can catch the students and we can provide them that help, we should. That's the whole point that's the reason why I keep on saying, use this system, because it's going to make your life easier, I would think. Because you can sort on that list to say, these are the students, probably I should call in whatever week that might be, and have that conversation as Michelle was suggesting, whichever way you want to have that conversation. But the kind of examples that you're talking about, I would bet that those are very rare sort of examples, because if you're not really performing well on your LMS, that's most likely what's going to cause you to go into red. The ones who are really high need and we haven't given you enough, we can't do anything about it, So maybe at that point, if you have more of those information, before you say, I call that student in, it's like, oh, here's an example of something like this student is from wherever, California, I can't do anything about it, but I can guarantee that's not what is creating that student to be in red. Yes, it's predicting, it's part of all those predictors, but that's not the significant predictor. The significant predictor is going to be how you're performing in your LMS. So if that's creating that student to be in red, that's the conversation you should be having about it. But if you have this other information where you knew that, oh, you know what, this student is also facing a very high amount of debt, I can't do anything about it, flag those students, and maybe Vince, Rebecca, or we can have that conversation. It's like, this is not something that I can help with, but I can refer to you to Drexel Central or whoever that is, so we bring to their attention. Does that make sense?
I do. What if, instead of looking at these students who are moving just from the red, but moving from the red to the green, right? We see
Right.
them moving over. What if we tap those students as a resource? Like, what did you do? what changed, and they could be really great peer leaders or peer mentors in some way, because they're able to perhaps model that resiliency or that grit or whatever it is that helps them move the needle in the other direction for other students, perhaps in similar situation.
Absolutely. You had a question?
It's more just a comment, just because I used to actually work in retention at CHP. I work now in graduate college, but I had access to everyone's Blackboard shells for the nursing students, so I actually had my own early identification outreach program to try to catch students before they got to the point of failure. So one thing you could do with at least, if you see a student in the red, maybe reach out to some of the professors and ask how they're performing, if you're kind of like teetering
Yes.
I don't know if it's a performance issue or if it's necessarily, just because I know not everyone has access to Blackboard, all their Blackboard shells, and he just looks through their grades after every exam. But that's like one way, because now that I work in school of education, this as an advisor, I work with the professors, and they tell me if a student is missing class or if a student is things like that, or if they're not performing well, just because I have such a smaller advising group than I did before I just had the entire nursing college for undergrad. But it does help, because then I can go and ask them what's going on. I can call them. I can say, you're not going to your field pace, or you're not participating in class. What's going on? Because at this point, it's a little different at the graduate level. But
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
Just again, if you're teetering at that part, it's like, should I call the student in or not? Again, you need more information. So if that means just calling the professors just to figure out like whether you should call that student or not, I think that's a great advice. Whatever we can do to, I mean, again, understanding that time is a huge constraint when you have so many advisees. So whichever way we can make this workflow easier, we are all in favor of it. Any other questions? The last piece I wanted to highlight, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows, but if in case you didn't know, there is a Hyperion report that's called, it's under students, early warning, attrition probability, where you have all the attrition probabilities for the current week, by week. You can look at all the factors. You can generate the list whichever way you want, by your name, by college, by major. If you just want to look at the students who are in red, who have been red for entire weeks, and our trend has been in red, you can get to that list in any way you possible, so that you know which are the students you want to reach out to. Again, as I said, use the data as much as possible, and if there is any questions, doubts, reach out to us. One of the things that we noticed, so we can look at the visit informations. So one of the metrics, stats that I will highlight for you is that for students, I think if I remember it right, for last fall, we looked at this data, and of the students who were at risk of leaving the university, we saw that 50% of the students were seen by an advisor in their entire term. So again, whichever way you want to use this data, whatever way is helpful, please let us know. We are open to providing you explanations, so that we don't want to create more work for you, but we just want you to use this data more efficiently, if you will. So, any other questions? I don't know if the online folks are asking questions. I can't see them. Was this helpful? Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are really here to help. I mean, as you can see, it's a lot of work to get to this, right? So, but we want to, as I said, we're sitting on tons of data. It's not that we don't have data. It's just how do we utilize this data? I keep on harping on that, is because it's so important. I mean, culturally, if we don't shift in the way we want to use data, then it's going to be difficult to affect change. And we see this every day from the perspective where we sit. That's why it's sort of like a pleading to you guys that please use this data, okay? If there's anything that you discover that's not working, reach out to us so that we can take a look at it. And if something is really a mistake, we should fix it, That's the whole point of it. We want to make this data as useful to you as possible. Yes?
There's an opportunity with engagement outside of academics, but if the first term GPA is the strongest predictor, then I would be interested in our case with this community of advisors around to develop a method or a model to work with those students
Right.
during those probation meetings, in collaboration with all of the other resources. And we've just started circa 2015 to refer to various places like class and tutoring centers. But is this enough? Is there more we can do?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and again, yes, understandably, why we're saying this is like we have this goal of reaching 90%. We could be reaching even higher than that. I mean, like as you can see that it's hard to get to that 90%. I mentioned to you before that as an institution, Drexel is really performing well, to get to those. But what else can we do, So yeah, if this is a broader conversation why we need to involve more folks, asking for funding or whatever that means, as she said, that, why aren't there enough funding for tutoring, more tutoring, if that's going to help? We have to determine that's the solution, that's the solution. We just don't know if we could provide more tutoring, whether students are going to take up on that or not. So we need data on that to see, like, whatever tutoring services we have now, is that doing enough? Or, like, the student is not availing those services. Because you as an advisor might say, like, yes, you need this tutoring help for math or whatever that is, but it's up to the student whether they're going to go and take that or not. You can't do anything about that. All you can do is refer. So how do we change that behavior to say, like, really, yes, I asked you to do this. If you really want to do well, you have to go and see a tutor or whatever that might be. How do we affect that change? So it's a little bit of more proactive advising, whichever way you will. We got to figure out what that model is. We just don't know. But, I'm sure you all understand that that's what the next step is going to be. Other questions? Well, thank you for your time. I was happy to be here and explain all this stuff. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. If you don't have our information, I'm sure Janet or Michelle will be able to provide you with our information. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.